James stepped out of his old car, the morning sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. He had driven all night to make it to this small town for Parents' Day at his daughter's school. The thought of seeing her face lit up with excitement made the exhaustion worth it. His little girl, his pride and joy, was waiting for him inside those walls. He adjusted his jacket, took a deep breath, and walked toward the entrance. As he approached the building, he noticed how quiet it felt. No kids running around or shouting like you'd expect on a school day. Instead, there was an eerie calm, almost as if something heavy hung in the air. James shook off the feeling, chalking it up to nerves. After all, he didn't get many chances to visit. Work kept him busy, and weekends were rare treasures he saved, just for moments like this. Inside, parents milled about, chatting casually while teachers greeted them warmly. James scanned the room, searching for that familiar smile. Then he saw her, his daughter waving eagerly from across the hall. She ran toward him, her backpack bouncing against her back, and threw her arms around his waist. "Dad!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with pure happiness. "You didn't forget me," she teased, pulling away to look up at him. "Forget you? Never." He grinned, ruffling her hair playfully. For a moment, everything felt perfect. They spent the next hour touring the classrooms together. She showed him her favorite desk, pointed out drawings she'd made, and introduced him to her friends. Each interaction brought more laughter and warmth into the day. James soaked it all in, savoring every second. But then came lunchtime, and the atmosphere shifted. That nagging unease returned as they headed back to her classroom. Something felt off. He couldn't put his finger on it yet, but he decided to stick around longer than planned. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was the way some of the other students glanced nervously at the teacher when she spoke. Whatever it was, James knew one thing for sure. He wasn't leaving until he understood what was going on. As the afternoon rolled in, the classroom buzzed with activity. Kids chattered excitedly, showing off their projects and sharing snacks during recess. James sat at the back of the room, trying to blend in, but keeping a close eye on his daughter. She seemed happy enough, laughing with her friends and munching on an apple. For a while, everything appeared normal, until the teacher's voice cut through the noise. "All right, settle down," she said sharply, clapping her hands twice. The room fell silent almost instantly. Her tone was firm, bordering on harsh as she began addressing the class. James watched her closely. There was something about the way she carried herself that felt off. It wasn't just authority. It was something colder, more distant. And then it happened. She turned her attention to Maya. "You," she said, pointing a finger directly at her. "Did you take the textbook from my desk?" Maya froze, her apple halfway to her mouth. "No, ma'am," she replied softly, shaking her head. "I didn't even go near your desk." The teacher narrowed her eyes. "Don't lie to me," she snapped, raising her voice slightly. "It doesn't look good when students can't be honest." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd seen teachers reprimand kids before. It came with the territory, but this felt different. There was no patience, no attempt to understand. Just accusation after accusation, delivered with an edge that made the air tense. Other students glanced nervously between Maya and the teacher, unsure of what to say or do. Maya tried again. "I promise I don't want excuses," the teacher interrupted, cutting her off mid-sentence. "If you took it, admit it now. That's the least you can do." James clenched his jaw, his fists tightening under the table. He wanted to stand up, to tell the woman she was crossing a line, but he forced himself to stay seated. This was Maya's battle, not his, at least not yet. Still, he couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. Why was she targeting her? Wasn't losing a textbook something that could happen to anyone? When the confrontation ended, or rather, when the teacher finally moved on to another topic, the damage had already been done. Maya slumped into her chair, her face flushed with embarrassment. James noticed how quiet she became, retreating into herself like a turtle pulling into its shell. It broke his heart to see her like this, especially when just moments ago she'd been so full of life. Later during art class, James decided to stay and observe more closely. If something was truly wrong, he needed to know for sure. The kids were tasked with painting whatever came to mind, and Maya eagerly grabbed her brush, dipping it into bright colors. She loved art. It was one of her favorite subjects, and James could see the joy return to her face as she worked on her canvas. But the teacher lingered nearby, watching over her shoulder. "That doesn't look realistic," she remarked coldly. "Are you even trying?" Maya hesitated, her brush hovering above the paper. "I'm doing my best," she murmured, clearly hurt by the comment. "Well, your best isn't very good, is it?" the teacher replied, moving on without another word. James felt his blood boil. What kind of teacher spoke to a child like that? Art was supposed to be expressive, personal, a chance for kids to explore their creativity. But here was this woman, tearing down Maya's efforts instead of encouraging her. Every snide remark, every dismissive glance, it all added up to something far bigger than just a bad day at school. By the time the bell rang, signaling the end of classes, James knew he couldn't let this slide. Something was seriously wrong, and if no one else was going to step in, he would have to. As they walked out of the classroom together, Maya holding his hand tightly, he promised himself one thing. He wouldn't leave until he found answers and justice for his little girl. James waited until the school emptied out before making his move. He couldn't shake the anger simmering inside him, but he knew losing his temper wouldn't help Maya. Instead, he took a deep breath and approached the teacher's desk. She was busy organizing papers, her back turned to him. For a moment, James hesitated. Was this really the right thing to do? But then he thought of Maya's face earlier, flushed with shame and confusion, and he knew he had no choice. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice steady. The teacher looked up, surprised to see him still there. Her expression shifted quickly from curiosity to irritation. "Can I help you?" she asked, not bothering to hide her annoyance. "I just wanted to talk about what happened today," James began, choosing his words carefully. "With my daughter. You accused her of taking your textbook." The teacher sighed heavily, as if she'd been expecting this conversation but didn't want to have it. "Look, I'm sure you're a good parent, but kids need discipline. If they think they can get away with things like that—" "Hold on," James interrupted, holding up a hand. His tone remained calm, but there was steel beneath it now. "I wasn't finished. I watched how you spoke to her. Not just today, but all afternoon. You singled her out in front of everyone. Why?" The teacher crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. "Maybe because she acts out more than the others. Maybe because she doesn't follow directions. Have you ever thought about that?" James stared at her, stunned. Was she serious? He thought about all the times Maya had come home talking about school, how excited she was to learn, how proud she felt when she got a project right. Sure, she could be stubborn sometimes, but that was part of being a kid. It wasn't a crime, and even if she did act out occasionally, did that give anyone the right to humiliate her? "I don't believe this," James muttered under his breath. He leaned forward, resting both hands on the edge of her desk. "Let me ask you something. Do you treat every student the way you treated her today? Or is it just her?" The question caught the teacher off guard. For a split second she looked unsure, almost guilty. But then her defenses went back up. "I don't have time for this," she snapped, standing abruptly. "If you've got a problem, take it up with the principal." James didn't waste any time. He found the principal's office easily enough. It was down the hall near the main entrance. When he stepped inside, the secretary greeted him with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to speak to the principal," James replied firmly. "It's important." After a short wait, he was ushered into a small, tidy office. The principal sat behind a desk cluttered with papers and books. She gestured for him to sit, her expression neutral but attentive. "What can I do for you, Mr. "Just call me James," he said, sitting down across from her. He launched into an explanation of everything he'd witnessed. The accusations, the harsh words, the way the teacher dismissed Maya's attempts to defend herself. As he spoke, he kept his emotions in check, focusing on facts rather than feelings. He needed the principal to understand that this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a pattern. When he finished, the room fell silent. The principal studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," she said finally. "We'll look into it." James frowned. Something about her response felt hollow. "Look into it? That's all you're going to say? My daughter was humiliated in front of her entire class, and you're telling me you'll look into it?" The principal held up a hand, trying to calm him. "I understand your frustration, truly. But these situations are complicated. We have protocols we need to follow." Protocols. James hated that word. It sounded so clinical, so detached, like Maya's pain could be reduced to a checklist or a form to fill out. He stood up abruptly, pacing the small space. "You know what? Forget the protocols. This is about a child, a little girl who deserves respect, no matter what. If you won't do anything, then maybe I will." The principal blinked, clearly taken aback by his intensity. "Mr. James, please. Let's not jump to conclusions. I assure you, we take matters like this very seriously." But James wasn't convinced. He thanked her curtly and left the office, his mind racing. Talking to the principal hadn't solved anything. If anything, it had made him angrier. What kind of system allowed someone like that teacher to keep hurting kids without consequences? More importantly, what could he do to stop it? As he walked back to his car, one idea kept circling in his head. It was drastic, maybe even reckless, but he couldn't ignore it anymore. Picking up his phone, he dialed 911. James stood outside the school, gripping his phone tightly. His heart pounded as he stared at the screen, hesitating for just a moment before hitting the call button. The line rang twice before a calm voice answered on the other end. 911, what's your emergency? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This wasn't easy. Calling 911 felt like crossing some invisible line, but he reminded himself why he was doing it. For Maya. For every kid who might be sitting in that classroom feeling small and powerless because of someone else's cruelty. "I'm calling about something that happened at my daughter's school," James began, his voice firm but measured. "She's been singled out by her teacher, repeatedly humiliated and mistreated in front of her classmates. I tried talking to the principal, but nothing's being done. It feels like emotional abuse." There was a brief pause on the other end. Then the operator responded, her tone professional yet empathetic. "Thank you for reaching out. Can you tell me more about what you've observed? Any specific incidents or patterns?" James nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He recounted everything. The accusation over the missing textbook, the cutting remarks during art class, the way the teacher dismissed Maya's attempts to explain herself. He described how isolated Maya had seemed afterward, shrinking into herself like she didn't belong. And then he mentioned the principal's dismissive response when he'd brought it up. "She told me they'd look into it," James said bitterly. "But I've seen this kind of thing before. People say they'll handle it, and then nothing changes. Kids keep getting hurt while adults sit around pretending everything's fine." The operator listened patiently, asking clarifying questions now and then. When James finished, she assured him that social services would investigate. "This isn't something we take lightly," she said. "We'll make sure someone looks into it thoroughly." Hanging up the phone, James felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. On one hand, he'd finally taken action, done something concrete to protect his daughter. On the other hand, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. Calling 911 wasn't going to magically fix everything overnight. There would be questions, pushback, maybe even resistance from the school. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was standing up for Maya, showing her that she wasn't alone. Later that evening, James sat with Maya at the kitchen table, helping her with her homework. She was quieter than usual, picking at her pencil instead of writing. He could tell she was still upset, though she tried hard not to show it. "You know," he said gently, breaking the silence. "What happened today? It wasn't okay. That teacher shouldn't have treated you like that. Maya shrugged, avoiding his gaze. It's not a big deal. Teachers are always mad at me. James leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table so he could look her in the eye. No, don't ever think that's normal. You deserve better than that, every kid does. She glanced up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. But what can we do? Everyone says teachers are always right. Not this time, James replied firmly. I called someone today. People who can help figure out what's really going on. We're going to make sure no one treats you like that again. For a moment, Maya just stared at him, processing his words. Then, slowly, a tiny smile spread across her face. Really? Really, he promised, reaching over to squeeze her hand. I won't let anyone hurt you, okay? Not ever. The next morning, news of James' call had already reached the school. Whispers buzzed through the hallways like wildfire. Some teachers shot him disapproving looks when they passed him in the corridor, while others avoided meeting his eyes. Altogether, even the students seemed uneasy, glancing nervously between James and the staff as if bracing for an explosion. By lunchtime, 2 representatives from social services arrived. They walked briskly into the building, their presence commanding. Attention, parents and teachers alike stopped whatever they were doing to watch them head straight for the principal's office. James waited outside, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. He could feel the tension radiating off the staff. They clearly hadn't expected things to escalate this quickly. When the investigators emerged hours later, their expressions gave nothing away. One of them approached James, offering a polite nod. We'll need to speak with you privately, she said, and possibly with your daughter as well. James agreed without hesitation. Whatever it took, he was ready. As they led him to a quiet room down the hall, he caught sight of Maya peeking out from behind a doorway. She looked nervous but hopeful, clutching her backpack straps tightly. He gave her a reassuring smile, mouthing the words, "It's going to be okay." Inside the meeting room, the investigator wasted no time getting to the point. Tell us, everything you know, every detail, no matter how small. This is important, so James did. He spoke openly, honestly, laying bare every painful moment he'd witnessed. By the time he finished, he felt drained, but also lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. For the first time since stepping foot in that school, he felt like someone was truly listening. Little did he know this was only the beginning. The investigation was about to uncover truths that would shake the entire school and change lives forever. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. Social services didn't waste any time. They interviewed teachers, students, and even parents who had witnessed the teacher's behavior firsthand. At first, many were reluctant to speak up, afraid of rocking the boat or being labeled troublemakers. But as more people opened up, a troubling pattern began to emerge. One by one, kids came forward with stories eerily similar to Maya's. A boy in 3rd grade recalled how the teacher mocked him for not finishing his math problems fast enough. She said, "I'd never amount to anything because I'm too slow," he admitted, his voice trembling. Another student remembered being scolded for wearing sneakers instead of proper shoes, only to realize later it was because her family couldn't afford anything else. But what stood out most were the accounts from other black students. One girl described how the teacher criticized her natural hairstyle, calling it unprofessional and distracting. Another boy talked about how she always paired him with the weakest students during group activities, implying he wasn't smart enough to lead. Each story added another layer to the picture forming in front of everyone. This wasn't just about tough discipline or high standards. It was something deeper, uglier. James sat in on some of these interviews, listening intently as each child shared their experience. Every word hit him like a punch to the gut. He thought back to all the times Maya had come home upset, but brushed it off as normal kid stuff, teasing, bullying, growing pains. Now he realized it was so much more than that. She hadn't been exaggerating, she hadn't been overly sensitive. Someone in a position of authority had been deliberately targeting her, and others like her. Meanwhile, the school buzzed with tension. Teachers huddled together in corners, whispering urgently whenever James walked by. Some defended the accused teacher, claiming she was simply strict and that kids needed boundaries. Others quietly admitted they'd noticed her harsh treatment of certain students but never spoke up, afraid of making things worse. The divide among the staff was palpable, creating an atmosphere thick with unease. Parents weren't spared either. Word spread quickly through the community, sparking heated debates online and offline. Some sided with James, praising him for taking a stand. Others criticized him, accusing him of overreacting or making a mountain out of a molehill. "It's just a teacher doing her job," one parent argued loudly during pickup time. "Kids need to learn respect." James heard snippets of these conversations, feeling both anger and disbelief. How could anyone justify treating children this way? Respect worked both ways. If adults wanted kids to show it, they needed to model it first. Still, he tried to tune out the noise, focusing instead on supporting Maya and the other kids brave enough to speak out. For Maya, the attention was overwhelming. Kids whispered about her in the hallways, pointing fingers and speculating about what was happening behind closed doors. Some called her names under their breath while others avoided her altogether, scared of getting caught in the crossfire. It broke James's heart to see her struggling under the weight of it all. One evening after dinner, Maya finally broke down. She buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why does everyone hate me?" she sobbed. "I didn't ask for this." James knelt beside her, pulling her close. Hey, he murmured, brushing her hair away from her forehead. "No one hates you. None of this is your fault. You're the strongest person I know, okay? Stronger than all those people who don't understand what's going on." She sniffled, looking up at him through watery eyes. "But why are they so mean?" He sighed, wishing he had an easy answer. "Sometimes people are scared of change. When someone stands up for what's right, it makes them uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. We keep going. For you, for your friends, for every kid who deserves better." Maya nodded slowly, though doubt still lingered in her expression. "Do you think it'll get better?" "I promise you it will," James said firmly. "Things might be hard right now, but we're building something bigger than us. Something that'll make life easier for kids like you." As the investigation dragged on, evidence piled up against the teacher. Former students reached out, sharing their own experiences years after leaving the school. One woman recounted how the same teacher had belittled her dreams of becoming a doctor, telling her she should aim lower since people like her rarely succeeded. Another man remembered being singled out for minor mistakes, made to feel like he was worthless no matter how hard he tried. Each account painted a damning portrait of someone who had abused her power for far too long. By the time the investigators presented their findings to the school board, there was no denying the truth. The teacher's actions went beyond mere strictness. They were discriminatory, harmful, and unacceptable. When the verdict came down, suspension pending further review, followed by termination, the news rippled through the community like a shockwave. For some, it was vindication. For others, it was validation of everything they'd suspected, but never dared to say aloud. And for James, it was proof that standing up for what was right, even when it felt impossible, could make a difference. But as much as he celebrated the outcome, James knew this wasn't the end. Justice wasn't just about punishing one bad teacher. It was about ensuring no child ever faced this kind of mistreatment again. As he hugged Maya tightly that night, he whispered into her ear, "We did good today, sweetheart, but our work isn't done yet." The fallout from the investigation hit the school like a storm. Parents packed into the gymnasium for an emergency meeting called by the principal. The room buzzed with tension, divided between those who supported the decision to remove the teacher and those who thought it was an overreaction. James sat near the back, Maya by his side, watching as emotions flared. The principal stood at the front, looking visibly uncomfortable. She cleared her throat and began speaking. "We understand this has been a difficult time for everyone," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "Our goal is always to provide a safe and supportive environment for our students. However, recent events have shown us that we need to do better." Her words were met with mixed reactions. Some parents clapped politely, while others muttered under their breath. One man stood up abruptly, pointing a finger at James. "This whole thing feels like an attack on teachers," he shouted. "Are we just supposed to sit back and let anyone accuse educators of wrongdoing without evidence?" James felt his jaw tighten but stayed calm. He knew this moment would come. People lashing out because they were scared of change. Instead of responding directly, he focused on Maya, squeezing her hand gently. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with worry. He gave her a reassuring smile, silently promising to shield her from the chaos. Another parent spoke up, this time in support of James. "I've seen how that teacher treats certain kids," she said firmly. "It's not right. My son came home crying more times than I can count because of things she said to him. If we don't address this now, what kind of message are we sending to our children?" The room erupted into arguments, voices rising over each other. The principal tried to restore order, but it was clear the community was deeply divided. James leaned down to whisper to Maya, "Let's go outside for a bit." They slipped out unnoticed, escaping the noise and finding refuge on a bench near the playground. Sitting there, James turned to Maya. "You okay?" he asked softly. She shrugged, kicking at the gravel beneath her feet. "I don't know. Everyone's fighting about me, and I didn't even do anything wrong." He sighed, resting an arm around her shoulders. "You're not the problem here, sweetheart. This isn't about you. It's about fairness. People are upset because they don't like being told they're wrong, but that doesn't mean we stop standing up for what's right." Maya nodded slowly, though doubt still lingered in her expression. "Do you think they'll ever stop talking about it?" "Eventually," he replied honestly. "But for now we focus on us, on making sure you feel safe and loved. That's all that matters." In the weeks that followed, the school implemented changes aimed at preventing similar situations in the future. Mandatory training sessions were organized for staff, focusing on diversity, inclusion, and recognizing unconscious bias. Teachers were encouraged to attend workshops on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. While some grumbled about the extra work, others embraced the opportunity to grow. For Maya, life gradually returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such a public ordeal. Her new teacher, a kind woman with a warm smile, went out of her way to make her feel welcome. Slowly but surely, Maya began to trust again, her confidence rebuilding piece by piece. But James knew the battle wasn't truly over. The incident had opened his eyes to larger issues within the education system, issues that couldn't be solved by firing one bad teacher or holding a few meetings. It was about creating lasting change, not just in schools but in communities, everywhere. And he realized he wanted to be part of that change. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table finishing homework, James broached the subject with Maya. "What if we did something bigger?" he suggested casually. "Something to help other kids who might be going through the same thing you did." Maya tilted her head, curious. "Like what?" "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "Maybe start a group where parents and kids can talk about problems at school. Or maybe reach out to other schools to share what we learned. Something to remind people that no kid should ever feel small or powerless." To his surprise, Maya's face lit up with excitement. "That sounds cool," she said, nodding enthusiastically. "Can we really do that?" "Absolutely," James replied, smiling. "If we can handle everything that happened here, imagine what else we can accomplish." And so, they began planning. James reached out to local organizations, sharing their story and asking for advice. Maya helped design flyers and posters, using her love for art to spread their message. Together, they started hosting small meetings at the library, inviting families to share their experiences and brainstorm solutions. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, doubts, and moments when it felt like they were shouting into the void. But every time they saw another child smile or heard another parent say thank you, they knew they were on the right path. As months turned into years, their efforts grew into something far greater than either of them had imagined. Schools across the district adopted new policies inspired by their work. Teachers received better training, and students found safer spaces to learn and grow. Through it all, James and Maya remained a team, proving that even the smallest voices could spark big changes. Looking back, James realized the journey had transformed not just Maya, but also himself. He'd started as a father, simply trying to protect his daughter, and ended up becoming an advocate for countless others. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, he faced it with hope, knowing they were building a brighter future, one step at a time. Months passed, and the small meetings James and Maya started began to gain traction. What had once been a handful of families gathering in the corner of the library grew into something much bigger. Word spread through word-of-mouth social media, posts, and even local news coverage. People were hungry for change, and James and Maya's efforts gave them a platform to voice their concerns. One Saturday morning, James stood at the front of a community center auditorium packed with parents, teachers, and kids. The room buzzed with energy, people chatting excitedly, sharing stories, and exchanging ideas. It was a far cry from the tense gymnasium meeting months earlier. This time, there was hope in the air. "Thank you all for coming," James began, his voice steady but warm. "When we first started this, it was just me and my daughter trying to make sense of what happened to her. We didn't know if anyone would care or listen, but look around, you're here. That tells me we're onto something important." He paused, scanning the crowd. Some faces were familiar, others he'd never seen before. A young boy sat near, the front clutching a notebook filled with doodles. An older woman nodded along, tears glistening in her eyes. Even a few teachers were present, eager to learn how they could do better. "We're not here to point fingers or place blame," James continued. "We're here because every child deserves to feel safe, respected, and valued, at school, at home, everywhere. And when that doesn't happen, it's up to us to step in. Together we can create spaces where no kid feels invisible or unwanted." The room erupted into applause, and Maya, sitting off to the side, beamed with pride. She loved seeing her dad speak like this, confident, passionate, and full of purpose. For so long she'd felt powerless, like nothing she said mattered. Now, watching him stand tall and fight for fairness, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. They were building something bigger than themselves. After the speech, the group split into smaller discussions. Parents shared their struggles. Some talked about bullying, others about systemic issues within schools. Teachers opened up about the pressures they faced, admitting they often lacked the tools to handle tough situations. Kids chimed in too, offering honest feedback about what worked and what didn't. Maya joined one of the groups, surprising herself by speaking up. "I used to think I was the problem," she admitted softly. "Like maybe if I tried harder, my teacher wouldn't have been so mean to her, but now I know it wasn't my fault. No one should ever make you feel bad for being yourself." Her words struck a chord with the other kids, who nodded in agreement. One girl raised her hand timidly. "What if your friends are the ones being mean?" she asked. "How do you help them without making things worse?" Maya thought for a moment before answering. "You tell someone you trust, a parent, a teacher, anyone. Sometimes people don't realize they're hurting others until someone says something. And even if they get mad at first, at least you tried." The adults listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. It was clear these conversations weren't just theoretical, they were deeply personal, rooted in real experiences and emotions. By the end of the day, everyone left with action items, ways to improve communication between schools and families, strategies for addressing bias, and plans to support students emotionally. As weeks turned into months, the movement gained momentum. Local organizations partnered with James and Maya, providing resources and expertise. Schools invited them to host workshops and training sessions for staff and students alike. Teachers learned how to spot signs of emotional distress in their classrooms, while kids practiced standing up for themselves and others. One particularly impactful session focused on storytelling. Participants were encouraged to share moments when they felt unseen or unheard, and how those experiences shaped them. A teenager spoke about being teased for wearing hand-me-down clothes. A single mother recounted struggling to advocate for her son who had learning differences. Each story added another layer to the collective understanding of what it meant to feel marginalized, and why change was so desperately needed. Through it all, James and Maya stayed grounded. They celebrated victories, no matter how small, and leaned on each other during setbacks. There were days when progress felt painfully slow, when criticism rolled in from skeptics who dismissed their work as unnecessary or divisive. But they pressed on, fueled by the belief that every effort counted. One evening, as they walked home after another long day of meetings, Maya glanced up at her dad. "Do you think we'll ever fix everything?" she asked quietly. James chuckled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Probably not. The world's a big place and there's always going to be stuff that needs fixing. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. Every kid we help, every teacher we train, every policy we change, it all adds up. You've already made such a difference, sweetheart. Don't forget that." Maya smiled, feeling a surge of determination. She might not be able to solve every problem, but she could keep showing up, for herself, for her friends, for kids she'd never even met, and knowing her dad was right beside her made it easier to face whatever came next. By the end of the year, the impact of their work was undeniable. Schools reported fewer incidents of bullying and discrimination. Teachers described feeling more equipped to handle challenging situations. Students expressed feeling safer and more supported than ever before. News outlets covered their story, calling it a blueprint for grassroots activism. But for James and Maya, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition. It was the connections they'd built. They'd created a network of people committed to making life better for kids everywhere. And though the journey was far from over, they took pride in knowing they'd planted seeds of change that would continue to grow long after they moved on. As they stood together on stage at the final meeting of the year, James wrapped an arm around Maya's shoulders. "This is just the beginning," he told the cheering crowd. "There's still so much work to do. But if we keep showing up, if we keep believing in each other, we can build a future where every kid knows they matter." And for the first time in a long time, Maya truly believed it too. The movement James and Maya had started wasn't just changing schools, it was reshaping lives. Parents who once felt powerless found their voices, speaking up not only for their own children, but for others too. Teachers began to see themselves differently, not as authority figures above reproach, but as partners in creating a better environment for everyone. Kids learned that standing up for what's right didn't have to mean shouting or fighting. Sometimes it meant listening, sharing, and believing in each other. One of the most powerful moments came during a school assembly months later. The principal invited James and Maya to speak to the entire student body. As they walked onto the stage, the auditorium erupted into applause. It wasn't the awkward, hesitant clapping they'd expected. It was loud, genuine, and heartfelt. Maya's cheeks flushed red, but she stood tall beside her dad, gripping his hand tightly. "Thanks for having us," James said into the microphone, his voice warm and steady. "We're here today because we believe in you, all of you. You might think this is about Maya and me, but really it's about all of you. Every single one of you matters. Your voice matters. Your story matters." He turned to Maya, nodding encouragingly. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, holding the mic with both hands. "I used to be scared to talk," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly at first. "I thought no one would listen. But then my dad showed me that even if people don't listen at first, you keep trying, because when you do, amazing things can happen." Her words resonated deeply with the students. Some nodded along while others wiped away tears. Afterward, dozens of kids lined up to thank them, many saying they finally felt seen and heard. One boy shyly handed Maya a folded piece of paper. Inside was a drawing of two figures holding hands, under a bright sun with the words "Thank you" scrawled across the top. Maya hugged him tightly, overwhelmed by the outpouring of gratitude. As the months rolled on, James and Maya continued expanding their reach. They partnered with local businesses to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. They organized mentorship programs connecting older teens with younger kids who needed guidance. And they launched a campaign called "Every Kid Counts," encouraging schools to adopt policies that prioritized emotional well-being alongside academics. Through it all, the bond between father and daughter grew stronger. Late-night conversations became brainstorming sessions where they dreamed up new ideas and solved problems together. James often joked that Maya was the brains behind the operation, pointing out flaws in plans he hadn't considered. Maya, in turn, credited her dad for teaching her how to be brave. "I wouldn't have done any of this without you," she told him one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You taught me that I'm worth fighting for." James smiled, pulling her close. "And you taught me that no matter how hard things get, there's always hope. We make a pretty good team, don't we?" But life wasn't without its challenges. There were still critics, people who accused them of stirring up trouble or making mountains out of molehills. Anonymous comments popped up online, questioning their motives and mocking their efforts. At first, these attacks stung, leaving Maya feeling defensive and James frustrated. But over time, they learned to let it roll off their backs. "They're mad because they're scared," James explained to Maya one day after reading yet another hateful comment. "Change makes people uncomfortable, especially when it forces them to look at themselves. Don't waste your energy worrying about them. Focus on the people who need us." Maya nodded, understanding now why staying grounded was so important. Instead of responding to negativity, they poured their energy into positivity, hosting events, mentoring kids, and spreading kindness wherever they went. Slowly but surely, the naysayers faded into the background, drowned out by the overwhelming support of those who believed in their mission. Years passed, and the impact of their work rippled far beyond their small town. Schools across the country adopted the Every Kid Counts framework, tailoring it to fit their unique needs. Teachers attended annual conferences inspired by James and Maya's vision, learning how to foster inclusivity and empathy in their classrooms. Students formed clubs dedicated to promoting fairness and respect, ensuring the message reached every corner of their communities. For Maya, growing up meant stepping into her own role as a leader. She graduated high school with honors, delivering a speech at her commencement ceremony that brought the audience to its feet. "When I was little, I thought the world was against me," she said, her voice strong and clear. "But I learned that the world isn't against anyone. It's full of people waiting to help if you're brave enough to ask. So go out there and be brave, be kind, and remember, every kid counts, including you." Watching from the crowd, James couldn't hold back his tears. He knew he'd done his job, not just as a father, but as someone who had shown his daughter how to stand tall in the face of adversity. Now, she was carrying the torch, lighting the way for others. In the end, their journey wasn't about fixing everything. It was about starting something. Something that would grow and evolve long after they moved on. James often reminded Maya that true change took time, patience, and persistence. "It's like planting a tree," he'd say. "You won't see the shade right away, but someday someone will sit under it and feel grateful." And sitting together on that porch years later, watching the sun dip below the horizon, they both knew they'd planted more than just a tree. They'd planted hope, a legacy of love, courage, and resilience that would continue to bloom for generations to come.